if you were just starting your career in real estate now, what segment of the real estate industry will provide the greatest training ground in the near term and growth opportunities over the long term?
Data centers is an incredible emerging industry today. There are only a few players in it. Most of the data centers are being built by the hyperscalers. And so it's not an industry that is nearly as large and developed as the big four food groups of office, retail, hospitality, and multifamily. But clearly, if you can get a good job in data centers, it is the future. It's where capital is going to go. And hopefully it's not completely where our economy is going to go, because I'd love to see humans having buildings that they can actually work in and live in. But boy, oh boy, is data centers a hot spot.
Prominent CEOs, leading economists, iconic investors. Insights from the experts. The Walker Webcast with Willy Walker. See who's next.
Welcome to the final Walker Webcast of 2024. It's my great pleasure to have my oldest friend on the planet, Peter Cook, as the interviewer today. It's also my great pleasure to not have to prepare for a Walker Webcast after having done so many of them this year. It's nice to have a week off where I get to just show up and be ready for anything and everything to be thrown at me. Given Peter's background as having been an extremely successful reporter for Bloomberg, covering Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. for Bloomberg for many years, then going to the Department of Defense and being the head of communications for Defense Secretary Ash Carter, and now running communications for the American Bankers Association. I have picked somebody who not only knows me exceedingly well, but is also one of the best reporters and questioners that we could find anywhere on the globe. And so I entered this session both very excited for Peter's questions and at the same time with a tad bit of trepidation, given how well Peter knows me and also how well he will take the questions that were sent in to us by many Walker Webcast listeners and take those and either ask them or not ask them to me. So with no further ado, Pete, great to have you. Thank you for taking an hour out of your busy schedule to do this, and fire away.
Wills, I'm honored to be on the Walker Webcast and truly surprised you asked me to do this, given how much dirt I do have on you over the years, all the way back to the crib. But it is truly an honor to be here. This is a great platform. You've done a tremendous job stealing my job, basically asking questions of people. You've gotten really good at it. So I'm happy to turn the tables on you today, and also truly impressed with the questions that were sent in by your audience members. Very sophisticated questions, not all just about commercial real estate, although everyone's really excited about two people called Fannie and Freddie. So we'll find out about them in just a little bit. But if I do my job right, we're going to touch on your personal life, your fitness, interests, obviously commercial real estate, the economy, but we'll talk some politics, maybe a few other issues along the way. And I will sprinkle in a few of my own questions, and perhaps I might have gotten a few questions from your colleagues and friends and admirers through the years who might have shared a few suggested thoughts with me. I thought, Wills, I took a look at last year's Ask Willy Anything session that Danny Gabriel led. I thought he did a great job with it, and I thought I'd steal from his playbook and start with the speed round. So if there are some folks on here who don't know you all that well, I thought maybe we get to know you a little bit through some quick speed questions. So we're going to start off here. Wills, what's the last movie you saw in a theater?
I wish I'd known that's coming, because I gotta search the memory bank. I honestly, I don't know. I can't remember the last time I actually went to a theater. I think maybe Dune. Yeah, I think I went to see Dune 2 with my kids.
All right. Chalk that one up that Willie doesn't go to the theater very often, but that's all right. I don't think all of us do. So last time, Wills, you wrote a handwritten thank you note.
Yesterday.
And we don't need to know who, but what's your thought process behind that?
Oh, I mean, literally yesterday I handed between 75 and 100 handwritten birthday cards and somewhere between 6 and 8 handwritten thank you notes to Victoria, who helps me with those types of things here in our Denver office at 2 different times during the day. So every single day that I'm in this office, I'm handing Victoria some handwritten note or letter going out to someone either internally or externally to say thank you for something they've done for us, to reinforce a meeting that I had in New York last week. A lot of different stuff, but I'm very old school in that, Pete. I find that handwritten notes is a thing of the past, and yet make the huge difference. So it's just something that I do, and quite honestly, a lot of people mention it, and it's interesting because I do it because I mean it, but at the same time, it also is noteworthy. A lot of people pay attention to it.
Well, your friends always appreciate your handwritten notes, so that's one of the reasons I put that question in there.
Start a legacy. Start turning dreams into realities. A better world begins with you. Better communities start with us.
I'm going to flip that on you, Wills. When's the last time you used AI, and what were the circumstances? Do you use it that much?
I don't, actually, and I have a lot of people who do. We use it at Walker Dunlop, and have certain protocols for everyone at Walker Dunlop to use it and also to fact check it. I find that AI hallucinates a little bit more than I would like to be able to fully rely on it. And I think the other piece to it, Pete, is that first of all, a lot of what I review at W&D is work that has been done by our team that is put in front of me. And so for me to have to actually go do, if you will, source research, there's AI that's playing into them preparing things, but when it gets to me, I'm not the one going in pulling all that information together. But I do get asked as it relates to using AI for the Walker Webcast, and I'm super old school in both that I don't outsource any of my research to anybody else on the W&D team, and then I also don't use AI. I think most of that is due to my desire to really get to know somebody or who my guest is and understand the data, and that either whether they've written a book or whether they have published out or the way that they run their company. And so I don't take any shortcuts. It's sort of, if AI all of a sudden put a script in front of me on the question to ask the CEO of Avalon Bay in my interview I did 2 weeks ago, I don't think that I've pulled it all together. I would have to read the script rather than knowing the data. And that interview, for instance, I did for an hour in front of a live audience at a BizNow conference, and I didn't have a single note, and I never looked at a piece of paper. So the only way for it to get from into my head so I can listen and have a flowing conversation is if I've actually done the research and not if AI's just spit out the answer for me.
I share that thought, Will, is that to really do an interview with someone, you really have to sort of know where you're going ahead of time. And I used to always have people ask me about the scripts that were prepared and handed to me and questions handed to me, and it never works like that in the TV world.
Well, and I'd also add, Pete, one of the things, having watched you on television for as long as I did, I think one of the things that you, and I think there was just an article this morning about how the Washington Post is having a hard time finding a managing editor. And I think one of the things that a lot of people forget is how hard journalism is. AI can go and scrape and pull feeds together and try and collate it, but really good journalism, which you did when you were at Bloomberg, was being prepared for the interview, but then also not just accepting the answer they give you, but knowing enough about the topic to push beyond that, to push back a little bit in a very respectful way. But I watched you time and time again with political leaders in Washington who would give you, if you will, their standard answer, and you would push beyond it because of your knowledge of the issue. And at the end of the day, obviously, that's what we're all hoping for from good reporting.
Agreed. All right, Will, so let's keep you on track here.
Yeah.
Serious questions. Are you a good dancer? Yes or no?
Oh, so that's great. I used to be what I would consider to be a bad dancer, but my girlfriend Sarah, she is an incredible dancer, and as a result of her being an incredible dancer, I've gotten newfound confidence in my dancing abilities, and I today will dance anywhere at any time. Sarah says that I'm a good dancer. I think she's just being nice to me. But at the
just
same
being
time,
nice to you, Wills.
She is, and the other piece to it is that everyone just looks at her, so I don't really have to worry about people looking at the way that I dance.
Yeah. All right. Well, you are not a good dancer. I'm going to officially confirm that. All right.
You
Will's your
haven't seen me
parents.
dance. You haven't seen me dance since your wedding in 1993. I'm not sure what you're talking about, but go ahead.
Wills, I know things. All right. So your parents, they're wonderful people. I've known them my entire life. They have great qualities and skills. What were you lucky enough to inherit or take away from them? You obviously got their genes, but what about their skills that you sort of bring into your daily life every day that really stand out to you? And if Diana and Mallory are walking, Merry Christmas.
They first of all, I'm super blessed to still have both of my parents with us, and you just lost your mom this year, and uh, know how challenging that has been. And thankfully, your dad Phil is still with us, which is incredible. He's in his mid 90s. But first of all, thankful that both my parents are still with us. Second, I would say, Pete, from my dad, it's a curiosity for knowledge. My dad is one of those people who has never stopped wanting to learn. He's just a lifelong learner. He reads more than almost anybody I know, and I mean, you know this. He'll see you and come up and ask you 1,000 questions about what you're doing, what you're seeing, and he'll have gone and done some work on something that he'll know something about banking policy right now, where he'll be able to dive in with really good questions to you and engage in a really good conversation. So I clearly get that desire or quest for knowledge from my dad. From my mom, I think it's relationships. My mom, and the way that she nurtures her friendships and invests in her friendships. You asked me previously about writing thank you notes. I learned that skill from my mom. She curates and maintains and invests in relationships in ways that I think few people do. And it's, I went into her, I was in DC 2 weeks ago, staying with my parents. And my mom was sending a Christmas gift to the child of her goddaughter. And to remember to give your godchildren gifts at Christmas time is one thing. To go to the children of your godchildren, she's just one of those people who is just so generous with her time and her love. And I think that I'm not nearly as good as my mom on that, but I learned from her how important that is.
Um, good things to say about both your parents, and both absolutely true. Wills, what do you absolutely have to have when you travel?
A gym. I literally this morning was talking to Sarah about a trip she wants to go on, and she was talking about a hotel we were going to go to. And I said, "Does it have a gym?" And she said, "Will you not go to a hotel that doesn't have a gym?" And I said, "I will not stay at a hotel that does not have a gym." So I work fitness into my life every single day, and when I go on the road, as my assistant McCrae knows very, very well, in every day, I have time set aside to take care of my physical health, which is also taking care of my mental health. And so a gym.
All right, we'll get to more on your fitness habits in just a little bit. What is guaranteed to tick you off?
Arrogance.
Favorite U2 album?
Oh, that's so. Octung Baby,
What's the last thing?
which surprises you as a huge U2 fan, because I'm pretty sure that's not your favorite album. But Octung Baby came out when I lived in Paraguay, and I listened to Octung Baby every single day that I lived in Paraguay. And it's just one of those albums that has such a important moment in my life, and I worked out to the music on Octung Baby. So when they went and played at the Sphere, which you were nice enough to take me to, because that whole concert was based off of Octung Baby, I think of all the people in that room who are all big U2 fans, loved it more than most, because that album is very special to me.
Good choice. Good choice. And enjoyed the Spear show. That was fun. What's the last thing you broke in your body, and how did it happen? Broken bone, that sort of thing.
I tore my hamstring off my pelvis 3 years ago. Tore the entire hamstring off. There are 3 tendons that attach it to your pelvis, so they had to go in and put screws into my pelvis and then reattach the hamstring to it. I did it in a somewhat fluke accident running, and I 3 months after surgery, I was on my bike and climbed Mount Lemmon in Arizona 3 months to the day after getting my hamstring repaired. So while it was the most painful thing I've ever had happen, my friend Dr. Jamie Gennaro here at Stedman put me back together perfectly. And with a lot of hard rehab, was back on my bike 3 months later, climbing Mount Lemmon, which was great.
Yeah, impressive. I remember you telling me that that really was a painful one. So,
Yeah, the
Wills,
most.
that means it's been a while. So be careful, like stepping outside today, because you could be due. So.
The funny thing about that, Pete, is that like if you look literally, if you pulled my medical insurance records, I have no cost whatsoever for anything. I take no prescription drugs. I go get my annual physical and do not have to go see a doctor for anything other than orthopedic surgery. And I do have, if you watch the chart as it relates to expenses, probably about every 3 to 4 years, I have some spike in my overall costs, and that's just me getting injured and having to go to the orthopedic surgeon.
That your friends, Wills, we're all happy to get you a brand new helmet every year when you go biking. All right. All right. What's your favorite indulgence in terms of food these days? And you're not allowed to say Brussels sprouts.
No Brussels sprouts. There is a lobster sandwich place around the corner from our office here in Denver that serves fresh Maine lobster and lobster rolls. And it's the yummiest stuff in the world. As you well know, Pete, I love lobster. And so having a place around the corner that gets fresh lobster from Maine flown in 3 days a week is a huge indulgence. And I love going there for a yummy lobster roll.
All right. Good. At least we know you're partially human. All right. Foreign country you're most eager to visit in 2025 and why?
Oh, God. What's so interesting about that is that 24 has been filled with a huge amount of travel. I just got back from being in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. I took my youngest son, Wyatt, to India earlier in the year. I went to F1 in Monaco. I was in France. I've been in Spain. I've been all over the place this year. But last night, with my sons, Charlie and Wyatt, we were talking about where we would like to go in the coming year. I took Charlie skiing in Chile in August. And Charlie was like, let's go on another ski trip. And we talked about going to Japan or to British Columbia. And my youngest son, Wyatt, really wanted to go to Afghanistan or Syria. And I question that. And I think it's because Afghanistan and Syria have been in the news so much recently. But I did put forth going to Pakistan. I have a great business school friend who lives in Pakistan who has invited me numerous times to come to Pakistan. And so trying to figure out whether we can go visit my friend Squib in 2025 in Pakistan. So maybe that's on the travel schedule this coming year.
Wills, before you book any of those trips to Pakistan, Syria, or Afghanistan, please check with me. I have some friends from my last job who could be very helpful and accommodating in terms of security. So,
well, I would only say on that, Pete. It's interesting. I've had a number of friends who've gone to Israel recently, and I have some friends who are going to Israel next week. I just talked to my friend Sam Raskoff, who's planning on going to Israel for the holidays, and it's interesting because you look at the headlines and you say, whoa, Israel is at war and people have to go into bomb shelters all the time and how dangerous it is. And at the same time, it's an incredible time to see these places. It's an incredible time of change. And it's an incredible time where, particularly in Israel, the sense of unity and nationalism and that they are fighting a worthy cause is something that everyone who's been over there recently comes back and says it was just a fascinating time to be there. And so while the headlines certainly can make people shy away from that, I do think that in some of these places, maybe not Syria, Syria will be very interesting to see how it comes together in its new whatever it ends up becoming. I remember when I lived in Paraguay back in 1989, and Alfredo Stroessner, who at that time was the longest standing dictator in the world, he was pushed out of power in August of 1989 by General Rodriguez. And I showed up in September of 89 to what was supposed to be a newfound democracy. And while Paraguay has remained in democracy since 1989, it was a big time of transition in that country. And so it will be interesting to see what happens to Syria and other nations that seem to be in the midst of power change.
Yeah, I would agree with you. In Syria, obviously, Wills, when I was at the Department of Defense, was a big focus of ours. And just to see what's played out in the last few weeks in Syria is truly amazing. And you can only hope for the Syrian people that some form of calm and a return to normalcy is not the right word, but the opportunity for refugees to come back, for Syrians to come back to a peaceful homeland. It'd be an amazing thing if it happens, but there are some tremendous challenges ahead. And I'm keeping a very close eye on the entire country, but the eastern third of the country, where the U.S. forces who are there are spending most of their time, worth keeping a very close eye on.
What do you think, Pete, about all the change that's going on geopolitically right now? I mean, you've got a no confidence vote that just went on in Germany. You've got a French government that's under huge strain. You've got a UK, which has been somewhat in disarray since exiting the European Union. You've got, everything going on in the Middle East with the changes that are going on in Syria. I mean, you were inside the Department of Defense. You were watching these issues every single day and knowing how the U.S. military would react to the type of change that's going on in Syria today. What's your take on this in the sense of, I mean, if you were still in the Defense Department today, would we be at a heightened alert level? Or are these, is what's going on in Western Europe, for instance, something that, it's the political process and it'll just work its way through?
Well, first of all, I would say, well, as I'm not at the Department of Defense, so I don't have the kind of daily information update, intelligence and otherwise that the folks there do. This is a complicated world, and every day we see that, and it's a world that's not always easy to predict, and we're seeing populism rise in so many parts of the world and the dynamic that occurs there. We're seeing change on the ground in places like Syria that we didn't necessarily expect just even a few weeks or months ago. And I would tell you that's why we have the Department of Defense that we do. The professionals there, civilian and military, it is a planning organization, as Secretary Carter would say on a regular basis to me and to many others, designed to plan for the unexpected. And we have tremendous people there capable and equipped to handle any number of scenarios. Whether or not what's playing out has been accounted for fully, I'm not there to say with certainty, but I have great confidence in the people who are there and their ability to adjust. And there are a lot of other levers for the United States to pull other than the military lever, of course. But I've got great confidence that if that uncertainty and unpredictability leads to instability and U.S. interests being at risk, and certainly U.S. people being at risk, that our military will be able to handle it no matter where it is in the world. So
I was really interesting. Just one quick thing on that. I was really interesting. Peggy Noonan last weekend in the Wall Street Journal wrote an article about how unique it is, if you will, the power that Trump has assumed, or the limelight that Trump has taken so quickly as a president-elect. And I think that speaks to both the strength of Trump coming into office and then the weakness of Biden leaving office. But one of the things that she said in the article, which sort of made me take a deep, kind of made me take a quick breath, if you will, of being a little bit shocked, was her point that someone might take advantage of this vacuum of power in the sense that Trump doesn't actually have the power. He doesn't have the office yet. Biden is completely marginalized, and that someone might in this next month do something to take advantage of what is to some degree a power vacuum today of the United States being able to react to it. And then I had somebody who's very, very insightful and knowledgeable about the Middle East say to me yesterday, wouldn't be surprised if we see something happen to the mullahs in Iran. And I'm sitting there running through in my mind thinking about what would happen if Israel made an attack on Iran to try and push regime change in Iran right now, and how the U.S. would react to that, given this sort of vacuum right now of Trump having all the power but none of the tools at his disposal yet, and Biden basically being marginalized. But it's just to your point about the professionals of the DOD, it would be very interesting and somewhat scary to see how we would have to react if we have sort of Trump with the voice but Biden with the power.
Yeah, we have one president at a time. And that president has tremendous power and tools at their disposal. And that's a hypothetical, Wills. I mean, it's not a hypothetical. I mean, the Israelis have conducted airstrikes on Iran in recent weeks. We all know that the tensions that are out there. I have a hard time imagining that would happen under the current circumstances, but there are people gaming things like that out, and that's their job at the Department of Defense. And we should all be pleased that they're there, no matter who's president of the United States. Those people, many of whom will stay in that position for the next administration, and we should be thankful those people are there.
Yeah.
All right, Wilson, I'm going to get you back on topic here. Going to get to some questions from some of your ardent listeners here. When did you first? This is from Jerome Johnson of Avery and Ivory Capital. When did you first discover you were good at something, and have you had any discoveries like that recently?
Oh, so I was, as you know, Pete, I was always a good athlete, and so whether it was being a quarterback on the football team or playing, youth hockey, I had that, on the athletic field, you always get instant feedback, and so I would put forth to you that was. Early on, sort of something that I gravitated towards because there was early success there, and that feedback loop is very fast. I would fast forward though from an academic standpoint. I don't need to tell you, Pete, I was a pretty average student in grade school and high school, but when I really started to focus on learning and doing a lot of learning outside of the classroom and on my own, and then ending up in business school, there was for me a very seminal moment, which was our first major exam at Harvard Business School, and everybody in our class studied endlessly for this exam. And there's a force curve at HBS. 10% of the class gets A's, 80% gets basically B's or C's, a passing grade, and 10% get an F. So as you can imagine, going into the first major exam, which was an operations management exam, that's the first kind of, where do you rack up against everybody else? And obviously at HBS in your class, there are a lot of really smart people. And I'll never forget, I got a 1, which was an A on that exam. I was in the top 10%. And all of a sudden I was like, whoa, like, I got this. Like, actually, I can do this. And so that was, really one of those seminal moments where I realized that all the work that I'd done sort of outside of the classroom to get myself prepared for the curriculum at HBS was paying off. And then I guess recently, one of the things that I spend a tremendous amount of time reading and trying to get to the bottom of sort of issues. And I was on the phone yesterday with somebody working on Fannie Freddie privatization and where it's going, what have you. And the person said to me on the phone, "You know more about this issue than anybody else, not only in the industry, potentially on the face of the planet." I said, "That's not true. I know a lot about it." But the reason I raise that is just that it's not just to kind of understand the issues, it's to triangulate and make the relationships to understand the differing points of view that then allow me to not just have a conversation that's beneficial for W&D or for W&D's industry, but to make sure I'm understanding what the trade-offs are going to be and coming up with something that would be politically viable for both sides of the aisle. And so that's the kind of learning that I'm doing today that I spend a lot of time on. And at the end of the day, you can never know enough. It's just a matter of kind of collating it and holding on to it.
Wills, we had so many questions about Fannie and Freddie. Let's knock that one out of here right away. What's going to happen to Fannie and Freddie next year under the first year of the second Trump administration? What's your thought on that?
So it's a super interesting topic, Pete, because you got to understand that we have a Republican administration coming in, but it's not a traditional Republican administration. And so as a result of that, many of the things that have guided Fannie Freddie policy for decades is sort of thrown to the wind. So the president has said he wants to privatize Fannie and Freddie. So that's a mandate that's out there. It's not top of the priority list, but it's on the priority list. The president has stated it directly. So then you say, okay, how does it happen and why does it happen? If it is done because the president said he wants it done and they just don't They shouldn't be part of the federal government, so let's just spin them back out. That would be a 26 or 27 effort after the tax bill gets worked on in 25. And the thinking around that would be who's in Treasury working for Secretary Bessent, who is the FHFA director, and how do they run that process. But I've spoken to a lot of people, including Mark Calabria, who was the FHFA director in the last Trump administration. And the thinking here is that they just need to be spun out of conservatorship, put back on their own feet. They've both retained capital. They can operate as quasi-governmental or quasi-private institutions, and they ought to go raise capital from private investors and run them the way that they used to be run. The shift in the narrative in the last week, though, that is very interesting is there's a lot of talk about using the privatization of Fannie and Freddie to offset some of the costs of President Trump's tax cuts. And if the privatization of Fannie and Freddie stays in that framing, there are two very important things to that. The first one is it moves from being a 26, 27 event to being a 25 event, because it's going to happen in conjunction with the tax bill that has to be done in 2025. So point one is it moves it up from a timing standpoint. The second thing to it is if it is being used as an offset to tax cuts, the motivation is to raise the most money possible in the IPO of Fannie and Freddie. So if you think about it in that context, what that then would do is say, okay, how do we raise the most capital for Fannie and Freddie? Fannie and Freddie's return on equity has dropped significantly in conservatorship for one major reason. They're not retaining risk anymore. So if you look back at Fannie and Freddie in 2007 pre-conservatorship, they were retaining a ton of risk on their single-family mortgage originations, as well as some of their multifamily mortgage originations. Today, due to credit risk transfer and what the regulator has had them do, Fannie and Freddie have moved all of that risk off to private capital. They've sold that risk off. So in selling that risk off, their return on equity has come down significantly. Right now, Fannie and Freddie are running ROEs around 4 to 6%. So if you're going to attract private capital to make the IPOs go really well, you need to give Fannie and Freddie the opportunity to increase that ROE. There are two ways to increase the ROE. The first is allow them to retain more credit risk. I don't think anyone inside the agencies, at the regulator, or on Capitol Hill wants Fannie and Freddie retaining more risk and going back to what got them into conservatorship in the first place. So I think you push that to the side. The second thing then would be to allow them to do more in the mortgage market than they are doing today presently. So for instance, the single family loan limit is at $867,000, I believe, today. You could look at potentially raising the single family loan limit. Plenty of people in the private sector, your clients at the ABA, who would say, that's our market. Don't let Fannie and Freddie come into it. But if you want to see that ROE go up, they're going to have to do more in the single family market. That might be doing more second homes, which is an area that now Chairman French Hill of the House Financial Services Committee literally told me face to face 2 weeks ago in his office, I don't want to see Fannie and Freddie doing more in the second home market. So, and then the final thing is allow them to do more on multifamily. Fannie and Freddie in the multifamily market today are doing 40 to 45% market share. In single family, they do about 85%. So you could let them do more in the multifamily space to increase that ROE. The issue on that, Peter, as you well know, is what I just said is anathema to traditional Republican thinking. Most people, like Jeb Henserling, who has an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today, would sit there and say, no, Fannie and Freddie should not crowd out private capital. They should be kept in a very tight box, and they should provide liquidity predominantly to the affordable housing industry and not become the financier of the entire mortgage industry. But given the setup for this and what the Trump administration wants to get accomplished as a potential offset to their tax bill, if it ends up getting tied to it, it's a 25 event, and it could be an expansion of what Fannie and Freddie do, not a reduction of what they do.
And the other point is if it's part of the tax bill and reconciliation, it only needs a simple majority.
Right.
So.
And that's the one other piece to that, Pete, which you know extremely well, is whether it goes down a legislative process or whether it goes down an administrative process. I don't want to get too far into the weeds as it relates to an explicit or an implicit guarantee. But I will say this. Fannie and Freddie have never had an explicit government guarantee on their paper, ever. They don't have it today, and they didn't have it pre-conservatorship. And so there's a lot of talk out there that they must have an explicit guarantee, or else their cost of funds will go up, and then that will get passed on to the U.S. consumer. The bottom line is you can get them set up in a post-conservatorship way that gives the market the same confidence that they had of the implicit guarantee pre-conservatorship today. And so it has to do with having a line of credit to the Treasury and a lot of other things. But we can figure that out without actually getting legislation that puts an explicit guarantee on Fannie and Freddie's bonds.
A lot to chew on there. We'll let the audience chew on it. I am just reminded, hearing you, Wills, being there at the moment when they were placed in conservatorship and covering Hank Paulson that day, and the look on his face when that action was taken. The fact that we're talking about it still today is sort of amazing, although I'm not totally surprised. All right, let me, I want to keep a close eye on the clock, get to more questions, and I'm going to go to a question from your buddy, Danny Gabriel, who was in this seat a year ago. If you had 30 minutes with President-elect Trump, what message would you want to get across to him?
Ooh.
And Wills, do we see you heading to Mar-a-Lago anytime soon?
Yeah. So I will say a couple things, Pete, on that in response to Danny's question. The first thing is I have been extremely impressed with President Trump's demeanor since getting reelected. There is a certain calmness to him and his leadership style. I've watched him very closely. I watched him at the New York Stock Exchange last week and have been very impressed with, in that interview where Jim Cramer jumped up from the set and went over to interview the president. He asked him this is the most fundamental, but so I think telling thing that the president responded, where Jim Cramer said, do you think it's a good time for people to buy into the stock market? And I believe President Trump 1.0 in 2016 would have said something very sort of like, of course, it's going to be great. Everything's going to be perfect. Just invest behind me, invest in America. And instead, the president-elect said, markets go up and markets go down. The bottom line is long-term, we as a country and the U.S. equity markets will go up and we will do very well. But it was a measured response, not sort of a bombastic response to the question, which I think we saw a lot of in President Trump's first term. So first of all, I would say congratulations and quite honestly, thank you for being more measured in the way that he is expressing himself. The second thing is I would try, and I know many, many people with much bigger voices than I have tried to get him to back off of his tariff stance. And I would try, like many have, to tell him that tariffs, at least in the short term, are going to be wildly inflationary and that could have some real impact to where interest rates go, and to try and temper some of his rhetoric as it relates to, it may not be rhetoric, it may be actually policy as it relates to across the board tariffs of 25% on Canada, Mexico, and China to start with. The third thing, I would make some comments as it relates to housing. The president is a real estate developer. The president understands multifamily housing very, very well. And so I would probably make a comment as it relates to using the leverage of Fannie and Freddie and the borrowing cost at Fannie and Freddie to try and reduce the cost of borrowing for the American consumer, and play into his thought of America first and focusing on the U.S. consumer and trying to make it so that people can continue to live the American dream, which is having a very good job, being able to save and own a single family home. The dream of a single family home is fully unattainable for a wide swath of the American public today. President Trump has the opportunity with his administration to make it an achievable goal for millions of Americans. And so I think that by getting single family home construction and getting the regulatory burden or the entitlement burden at the local level somehow sorted out, and that could be both carrots as well as sticks from the federal government to make it so that some of this red tape gets out of the way at the local level, to allow for more land to be entitled and for both single family and multifamily housing to be built, can bring down the cost of housing in America. And then the other one is interest rates. If tariffs come in and if rates move up, I don't care how many new homes you build, housing's still going to stay unaffordable from an interest expense standpoint. And so he's got to stay mindful of the fact that if tariffs come in and the Fed has to turn around and start raising rates again and the 10-year runs, that cost of borrowing to the consumer is going to go up precipitously. And so he's got to be very mindful of what his broad macro strategy does on rates, because he knows as well as anyone on the face of the planet that lower interest rates drives everything through the economy, with over $1 trillion of credit card debt outstanding and a $13 trillion single-family housing mortgage market in America. Rates go down and the economy starts running.
Will, as you just answered about 7 or 8 of the questions that came in various fashions. Some folks asked, what's it going to take to revive the housing market? What policies could the Trump administration embark on? There were a number of questions related to immigration and tariff policy and the impact those decisions could have in terms of inflation and ultimately on the commercial real estate marketplace. Anything else you want to add on that? How let's assume your 30 minutes at Mar-a-Lago aren't successful and some of those actions come. How are you thinking through that in 2025 and beyond?
Well, I think first of all, the president does watch the markets. It should not surprise anyone that he went to the New York Stock Exchange last week, and he's only the third president since Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump are the only 3 presidents since 1980 who've gone to the New York Stock Exchange. And the president does watch the markets. So the 10-year starts to run, and I can guarantee you the president is watching that and understands the impact on the economy that a 10-year running is going to do. Now, there are only so many things that he can do to control that. And one of the biggest issues is the $30+ trillion of U.S. debt and the deficits that are planned to continue to grow. If the president and his administration were to work with Congress to try and significantly reduce our debt position and the deficits that we're running, I'm certain the market would rally upon that. But there's only so much they can do. But look, what Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are going to focus on with their Doge efforts, anything they do there to make the government more efficient and to try and reduce our federal fiscal deficit on an annual basis will be very well received, I believe, by the markets. The other issue you brought up, Pete, was immigration. And I think one of the big things to keep in mind here is the following. We know that there is going to be a big crackdown on illegal immigration into the country. We also have questions today as it relates to deportations and how much the Trump administration is going to really lean into deporting people beyond convicted felons and other people who I don't think anyone is going to have an issue with them really focusing on that. I think the real question is legal immigration. And does the new Trump administration either say we've stopped illegal and we now want to allow for significantly more legal immigration, or whether they bring down the numbers on legal immigration? We need more legal immigrants to the United States. We need their talent, and we also need their population growth. And so if they do those two things, I think the immigration, illegal immigration, deportation issue is somewhat of a non-issue. If they simultaneously cut off illegal immigration and bring down legal immigration at the same time, we're going to have a very difficult time finding growth from a population standpoint and from an economic standpoint, and could find ourselves in the same place that Japan has been for the last 20 years, which is negative population growth. We're not making babies in the United States right now at a point where we're going to get the type of population growth that will drive the GDP growth that we are all used to. And so immigration has a big role to play there. And I'd love to see them say, cut off illegal and raise legal.
All right, let's go into a couple of specific questions that definitely coming from the commercial real estate side of your audience. Couple of quick ones, Wills, if we can. If you were just starting your career, this comes from Scott Fishbone of Avalon Bay. If you were just starting your career in real estate now, what segment of the real estate industry will provide the greatest training ground in the near term and growth opportunities over the long term?
Oh man, look, any company in any part of the commercial real estate industry is going to give you good training as it relates to how do you underwrite assets, how do you determine credit, et cetera, et cetera. I would tell you, if you look at some of the enormous leaders in our industry today. I'll use two off the top of my head. Barry Sternlicht and Bob Faith. Barry Sternlicht and Bob Faith are two of the most outstanding commercial real estate investors, owners, capital formation executives, money raisers that you will find anywhere. Bob and Barry both came out of business school right into the real estate crisis of the late 80s, early 90s, and the Resolution Trust Corporation. And both Bob and Barry cut their teeth on workouts. And you look at why the two of them are such amazing investors in good times, it's because they learned the industry in bad times. So if you really want to have some guts, Scott, I would say go to someone who owns a bunch of B and C class office buildings and spend 2 years figuring out how you work out those assets. Because how those assets get worked out is going to be super difficult. And you'll learn all sorts of things from a capitalization standpoint, from a valuation standpoint, from a tenancy standpoint, et cetera, et cetera. But if you don't want to go to the deep end of the swimming pool quite that fast, I would also say that data centers is an incredible emerging industry today. There are only a few players in it. Most of the data centers are being built by the hyperscalers. And so it's not an industry that is nearly as large and developed as the big four food groups of office, retail, hospitality, and multifamily. But clearly, if you can get a good job in data centers, it is the future. It's where capital is going to go. And hopefully it's not completely where our economy is going to go, because I'd love to see humans having buildings that they can actually work in and live in. But boy, oh boy, is data centers a hot spot.
All right, Will, a couple other quick ones. I had to do my quick check of acronyms here in the commercial real estate space. How do you see the expansion of BTR, build to rent? I learned what that is, affecting the single family housing market. And that comes from Patricia Curley of BHHS Barani Realty.
So go back to the interview that I did with the CEO, Ben Schall of Avalon Bay 2 weeks ago. Avalon Bay owns 381 apartment communities across the country. And today, the delta between being a renter in an Avalon Bay community and owning the median priced home in the area around one of their apartment buildings across the nation is $2,000 a month. $2,000 a month. So the cost of ownership is so far away from most renters today that they can't jump to own a single family home. But they certainly can go from being a renter in an Avalon Bay apartment community to being a renter of a single family home. And so the dynamics of single family SFR, single family rental, or BTR, build to rent, are fantastic. And as long as that delta between living in an Avalon Bay community and buying the median price single family home stays as wide as it is today, that space will do exceptionally well.
All right. Again, we had a bunch of questions in that area. I think your interview a couple of weeks ago prompted a number of questions in that space. Let me ask you a different question, Wills, and this is something that we are talking about and working on every day at the American Bankers Association with our members across the country, smallest banks in the country to the largest, and that is fraud. You had a very thoughtful question from John Bain of W&D about the increase in mortgage fraud and just the sophistication of that fraud in terms of people submitting applications and just the ability to cause mayhem in there with bogus applications and everything that has to be done in the underwriting process to be able to identify it. And John's questions, let me cut to the chase here. To what extent, how quickly do you see WD, the agencies, the financial services industry in general, getting AI or other systems in place that can screen out sketchy or fraudulent deals before they go under application? He has a follow-up question basically about the opportunity for collaboration among competitors within the industry to share information and try and fight this problem before it gets out of hand.
Yeah, so it's we could spend a whole hour on this topic, Pete. Clearly, there are pros and cons to artificial intelligence and what it does. My friend David Faber at CNBC gets concerned that some chat bot is going to replace David in doing the news. And I've told David that's not going to happen anytime soon. But he and Kramer actually did something on CNBC where they had, these mock-ups of them that could imitate the two of them almost perfectly. And you got to sit there and say, okay, if that's coming to live television, what's going on with the documents that we underwrite every single day to understand whether a loan is a good loan to make or a bad loan to make. Clearly, the use of technology is extremely important, and we're investing a lot on technology. I would also say that the agencies, Fannie and Freddie, as well as their regulator, are all over this issue and have raised new standards across the board to make sure that we are being vigilant to protect both us and them against mortgage fraud. And then the final thing I would say is, it's somewhat, Pete, analogous to the media industry / the newspaper industry, in that people want to go to trusted brands. People want to know that the news that they're getting comes from a trusted brand, which is why, there are only a certain number of publications out there today that have the name of the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, to use two of them. And I think there is massive value in those brands. Similarly, if you are a new borrower to Walker & Dunlop, the diligence we're going to have to do to write you a new loan is significantly higher than a repeat borrower that we have a long track record with and that we know how they operate and how they manage their assets. And so I think that not only is there increased vigilance at the front end to make sure that we're making good loans, and I have to take my hat off to the people in our underwriting group as well as our technology group of all that we put into place. We caught something just last week on a pretty significant attempted fraud, a borrower who was attempting to borrow fraudulently on an asset. It's amazing what our team is doing, but it's making every loan we do more complex. It's raising the cost of doing a loan, hence why we want to use more and more technology to help us do that. And I'm very certain, Pete, that you're seeing it all across the ABA's member base as it relates to people using technology to be fraudulent on the front end that we've got to be able to catch on the back end, if you will.
Yeah, we're doing a tremendous amount in this space, and our CEO, Rob Nichols, this has been a priority for him, and really a challenge. I would say that our members feel like they're doing a tremendous amount to protect their customers. We have national industry-wide campaigns that we're launching. But there's a real push to challenge this next administration to come up with a national strategy for fighting fraud. It has become such a huge problem. Wills, I'll give you one stat. We'll move on to some other questions. I don't know the last time you wrote a check, but check writing in this country has gone down. The use of checks 25%, but check fraud has doubled since 2021. It is an incredible problem right now, and that's just one small example of what's going on out there. All right, Wills, I want to be mindful of the clock. We have just about maybe a little less than 10 minutes left in the webcast. I want to get to your predictions at the end. A couple of other quick questions for you. How do you see remote work, e-commerce influencing Walker & Dunlop's lending strategies over the next few years? The evolving trends in commercial real estate. Is everyone going back to the office, Wills, or what's going to happen there?
Yeah. I think everyone's going back to the office. I've been pretty outspoken on this. Look, you can't create culture. You can't build a sustainable culture inside of a company if you don't have people interacting with one another face to face and sharing experiences and brainstorming together. Zoom's great. We're on a Zoom call right now. You're in Portland, Oregon. I'm in Denver, Colorado. Awesome. But, I just saw you. And when I see you in person, it's fundamentally different than it is over a Zoom call, no matter how close you are as friends. And there's something that is missed by being over technology. So I do believe that we're coming back to the office. I think President-elect Trump gets in office, and one of the first things he does in his first 100 hours is mandate that all federal employees come back into the office. And I think he will use that not only to get federal workers back into the office, but then also to potentially spur some people stepping away from their jobs at the federal government because they don't want to go back into the office, which is going to help his Doge efforts that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are focused on. But I think that once the federal government gets back in there, I think everyone's going to sit around and say, well, the federal government's back at it. We got to get back at it. And I think technology can be used to make lives more convenient. I woke up this morning and did 2 Zoom calls from home because they started early. I jumped on them. I did them from home, but then I jumped in my car and came into the office, and I'm here for the rest of the day engaging with my counterparts at W&D. And so I think it's coming back. I have not given up on office at all. And I think that A-class office is actually a really great asset class. And so, yeah, I think that that's the future. AI, technology, all of that. There's a lot of talk out there that AI is going to disintermediate tons and tons of jobs. That was the same thinking that was there when Microsoft created Word and Excel. When Excel was created, you may recall, Pete, when I was working on Wall Street at Morgan Stanley, there's a lot of people there who'd grown up using slide rules and doing math on their Hewlett Packard 12C or 18B. And they sat there and said, man, you've really got to be able to do this stuff. And this Excel stuff's just going to, drive away jobs on Wall Street. All it did was drive more jobs on Wall Street. All it did was make Wall Street that much more relevant to what's going on in our economy and create massive jobs. So I'm one of the believers that technological innovation grows the economy, not shrinks the economy. Will there be winners and losers? Undoubtedly. But I think one of the biggest things that CEOs particularly have to keep in mind is how are you making your operations more efficient by the use of technology and making at Walker & Dunlop, bankers and brokers more insightful to our clients by the use and effective application of technology. And I think it's that application piece that's so tricky. A lot of people talk about it. I was just in New York at the JP Morgan Asset Management Conference, Pete, and Michael Semblis was talking about all the investment that's gone into AI. And he put some stat up there that basically says that we've built enough AI capacity to have 9,000 chat GPTs. Like that there's just this massive amount of investment and that it actually hasn't turned into actual applications, actual economic growth. And the bottom line is we're going to find ways to use this technology to continue to grow the economy. And companies have to figure out the ways to apply the technology, not necessarily just develop the technology.
Gotcha. All right, Will, so before we get into the final speed round here, some of your predictions, an interesting question from Stephen Wang of BuildStar. Real estate companies are like the miners during the California gold rush, focused on transactional wins and localized efforts, competing fiercely for rewarding opportunities, navigating unpredictable market conditions, and hope their decisions yield returns despite countless variables beyond their control. Do you agree with this analogy? How can real estate companies break free from this mindset and position themselves more strategically like Levi Strauss or Wells Fargo? Again, going back to that gold rush comparison. Sort of an interesting question, Wills.
Well, I mean, what is real estate? Real estate is where people live, shop, work, and play. That's what real estate is. If you don't think that people are going to live, work, shop, and play going forward, real estate ain't a great place to be. I happen to think that human beings are going to continue to populate this earth. And I happen to believe that people are still going to want to live somewhere, shop somewhere, work somewhere, and play somewhere. And so it's not, I don't think, analogous to, the exploration of the West and those miners there was a finite amount of gold that was in the ground that got mined, and then you don't have a mine anymore. And so, yes, it makes sense that Levi Strauss endured beyond that because they could take their clothing that was designed for miners and make it applicable to other people in other industries. But there's no finite amount of space to be developed. There's no finite today, clearly with population growth globally. There's no finite amount of humans to house, to create office jobs, to be able to have them go play at a Disneyland or to have them go shop at a mall or online. That then requires, by the way, don't forget that online shopping requires 4x the amount of industrial space that bricks and mortar shopping requires as it relates to actually going to a store and buying it. And so while Amazon may continue to grow, and online sales, don't forget, are less than 20% of US retail sales today. Less than 20% of retail sales are online. 80% is still bricks and mortar. But even that growing segment of online sales requires a huge amount of physical infrastructure to be able to get those products and services to people where they work and where they live. So count me as, somebody who is very bullish as it relates to future needs for commercial real estate. And one of the things that goes back to as it relates to the United States is that question on population growth and immigration and legal immigration, which we need a lot more of in the United States.
All right, Wills, a couple quick ones on your predictions. Biggest surprise in the commercial real estate sector in 2025?
Wow. Biggest surprise in 25. Why not? Fannie and Freddie get privatized in conjunction with the tax bill.
All right. We'll be watching closely. How far do the Commanders go in the playoffs?
Go. Lose in the again, like what I just said on biggest surprise. I'll go with lose in the NFC championship game. Don't make it to the Super Bowl, but the Eagles end up going to the Super Bowl.
Wills, you're gonna be so wrong on that, by the way. All right. The Dow, the 10-year at the end of 2025. Your crystal ball, Wills. How are you dusting it off?
Yeah, Dow's around 43,000. We've had 20+% growth years on the equity markets. I don't think we can go for a third, but we are in uncharted territory. And the one thing in President Trump's first term, as far as an economic indicator that was off the charts throughout his entire 4 years, was consumer confidence. And so if you have a very confident consumer, you are going to get an increase in spending, whether people can afford it or not, which is going to drive GDP. It's going to drive retail sales, a bunch of other things. So I would say the equity markets are up on the year. I don't know, I'll swag it and say somewhere between 5 and 10%. So the Dow goes, from 43,000 up 5%, I'd say on a kind of an easy one for me to go at, but positive growth on the Dow. As it relates to the 10-year, the JP Morgan Bank CEO conference was week before last. They did one of those little clicker things for all the CEOs in the room, and 60% of the bank CEOs said that they expect the 10-year between 4 and 450 in 2025. That's an easy range, but it kind of makes sense, Pete. If you've got the Fed cutting, and whether the Fed goes to a 4% Fed funds rate or cuts further than the 4% Fed funds rate, you got to get to a normalized yield curve at some point where the short end of the curve is lower than the long end of the curve. And so I would say a 10-year between 4 and 450, and a Fed funds rate that hopefully gets down to 4 and potentially drops below 4 to get back to a normalized yield curve would be a great development throughout 25.
All right, I'm sure everyone watching is writing those predictions down. We'll check with you back in December of 2025 to see where things stand. Wills, as you and I talk, the Fed is going to be deciding on interest rates later today. The forecast is that the Fed will have another cut today, and then there's some questions about what happens after that. If you're in Jay Powell's shoes right now, what are you doing? What are you thinking?
So first, I saw the chairman on the shuttle flying from New York to DC 2 weeks ago. He was sitting across from me, and I congratulated him on a job exceedingly well done. I think a lot of people forget how challenging the past 2 years have been, how dramatically they raised rates. And when they did it at that rate and at that pace, that everyone said this economy is going to crash. Something like 60% of economists in January of 2023 said that we were, without a doubt, going into a recession. So the fact that we've gotten through this massive tightening and gotten away without going into a recession is incredible. And so I take my hat off to Chairman Powell for all the great work that he has done. And then I would say they cut today, because there's no reason for them to be in and out and bouncing all over the place. Obviously, the most important thing is, does he say we're going to take a break? Does he say we're going to continue forward? As you probably know, Pete, right now, the Fed has on the dot plot an average of 4 cuts in 2025. We'll see what the revised dot plot says. Wall Street right now is predicting, I believe, 2 cuts in 2025. But also remember, a year ago right now, the prediction was 7 cuts in 2024. 7. And so we might get 3 today. And one aside to all of that is if we get the 3rd cut today, on January 15th, I will be in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania with my dear friend Peter Linneman, legendary Wharton professor who comes on the Walker Webcast quarterly. In May of this year, when everyone had given up on the Fed cutting at all, Peter Linneman came out and said they're going to cut 3 times this year. And I got email after email after email of Walker Webcast listener saying, I love Peter Linneman, but I've given up on him now if he thinks we're actually going to get 3 cuts. There are plenty of people who could say that we've actually already gotten 3 cuts because they did the 50 basis points in their first cut. But holding that aside, if they cut again today for the 3rd time, I have to go to Philadelphia and kiss Peter's feet because I told him that they actually cut 3 times, I'd go kiss his feet. So if they cut in a couple hours, I'm going to have to put on some good lip gloss and go and kiss Peter's boots on January 15th in Philadelphia. But I would say that they cut today. And then obviously what is very important is going to be the wording about what they're saying as far as future cuts. There's clearly, Pete, the ability for people to say, economy is growing really well. Why would you continue to cut? I would say to you that if they cut down to 4 or even 375, they've got plenty of dry powder for future cuts. I mean, one of the big question marks was the Fed had gotten so tight that there was nowhere for them to go to be able to stimulate the economy if the economy were to falter. If they get to a 375 run rate or a 350 run rate and they sit there, they've got plenty to go as it relates to stimulating the economy in the future should they need to. And the only fear I would think they have is that it gets just too hot. But, good luck tempering that consumer confidence that's out there and stood out there throughout the entire first administration of President Trump, who on the second time around is coming in with more confidence, a team that's going to hit the ground running, and with a real game plan that they are going to execute on, I think, with, incredible haste. One of the things that somebody I was talking to last week who's at the Harvard Kennedy School said, the talk at the Harvard Kennedy School right now is not the first 100 days, which is what most people focus on when a new administration comes in. They're focusing on the first 100 hours. There are going to be executive orders that come out in flurries after January 20th that I think will take some time for everyone to digest and figure out where this administration is actually going to take us. But boy, oh boy, does it feel like the Trump administration has a strong mandate behind them right now.
Wills, I'm keeping an eye on the clock. I want to be respectful of everyone's time and your time as well. This is normally an hour or so webcast. I want to give you a final word. I know you've probably had a message, probably already delivered or plan to deliver to your WD employees. And my apologies to all the WD employees who sent excellent questions. I couldn't get to all of them here. What is your message to them in the new year? And what message do you have to your audience in the new year? And is there a message of optimism that you are trying to share with your staff? Realism, questions about the future? There are uncertainties out there, a whole host of them. But what are you trying to convey to your team right now that you might share with your wider audience?
So first, Pete, thank you for doing this. I greatly appreciate you spending the time and asking all these questions that were so good and so important at this time in our world and what we're doing. Second of all, I'm a very optimistic person by nature. I wake up every day thinking, what are we going to do tomorrow, and how great is today going to be? And so I have a lot of optimism about where we're headed. There's plenty to be concerned about. I think that one of the things that people have somewhat forgotten about is that, during the last Trump administration, there were a lot of things that went on in Washington that were difficult for corporations to respond to and to react to. Some things as it relates to just general culture that came out of Washington that companies had to deal with. How do you deal with that statement? How do you deal with that policy statement? And there are a lot of things that are very important to a lot of people that this administration will not focus on, will not put time into. And people have to be focused on what is important to the people who work in their company, what is important to the people who live in their community, and how do you stay true to what your values are and to what you think is important for the people who are around you all the time. And so dealing with that will be challenging. At the same time, I have great excitement and optimism as it relates to what's going to happen to the U.S. economy under the next administration. This is a very pro-business administration, and I think that we will be in a high growth mode for the next couple of years. Should the United States economy be 70% of global capital markets, there's a lot resting on the United States and our growth. I mean, all eyes are on the US. Europe is down right now. China is really troubled. It's interesting where people can put capital. And right now, everyone's saying capital should come to the United States. And so the Trump administration has an incredible opportunity here, truly incredible opportunity. And let's hope it is all for the better. We know it won't all be for the better. But I would just say, be ready for change. Our world changes every single day. And the final thing, Pete, I would say is, AI has just come in. We talked a little bit about it as it relates to fraud. A lot of people are nervous about AI. A lot of people are nervous about their jobs as it relates to how does AI impact what I do. I think the best way for job security is to figure out how you can use the technology to make you better at what you do. And if you're taking that on, not waiting for someone to come and show you how the technology is changing your job, but are exploring the use of it and how does it make you more effective. At the end of the day, it was Ben Affleck, I think, who was interviewed by David Faber, where David Faber's basically said, is AI going to take away movies? And is it going to take away the movie making industry? And Ben Affleck's response to that, anyone who hasn't seen it, I would strongly encourage you to go see the back and forth between Ben Affleck and David Faber. But what Ben Affleck basically said was, movie making and the brilliance of movie making is knowing when to stop, not what to create. Anyone can write the script. It's knowing when you stop something to start the next part of it. And he said, AI can't do that. That's uniquely human, the ability to have a script and edit it, to have a moment where it's a punchline, to make it so that it is unique and creative. And so as I listen to Ben Affleck talk about that, about the movie industry, I think there are lots of parallels to the industries that we all work and live in, that those people who embrace the technology and figure out how it's going to make them more insightful, more efficient, they will be the winners long term.
Ben Affleck and AI, not on my bingo card for this conversation, Will. So I got to be honest.
There you go.
All right. Always a pleasure, Wills. Thanks for letting me play on the Walker Webcast. And I look forward to having you take me to the Commanders in the Super Bowl this year when they get past the Eagles.
I didn't tell you they were going to get past the Eagles. I said they lose in the NFC Championship game to the Eagles. I already said that.
I know.
They're not. And you think they're going to get beyond.
Yeah, and you're going to pay for my ticket.
Pete, you're on. Commanders go to the Super Bowl. I'm taking you and paying for your ticket. Done. Done.
Listening.
Best money I'll ever spend. Best money I'll ever spend.
All right.
Thanks, Pete. Happy holidays to everyone. I have to say a quick shout out to my colleague and partner in crime in all of this, Susan Weber. She does an amazing job of making the Walker Webcast tick on a weekly basis. There's a whole nother crew of people at W&D who help us tremendously. Catherine and Sam and Coco and others. But Susan, thank you very much for all of your help throughout the year. And to all of my guests on the Walker Webcast, it honestly is all about you. And I'm honored and privileged to have such incredible people come and join me on a weekly basis. And that includes you, Pete, for taking the other side of this one and taking the microphone this year to ask me some really good questions about the world we live in. So thanks very much.
You bet. Merry Christmas, Wills. Happy holidays to everyone.
See you, buddy. Thanks.